The western continent is long and narrow, and its greatest extent is from north to south. Mr. Turnblad, I do believe I would like you to read this aloud, for I feel that you could use some additional help with this material. Here you are, sir. Harriet Bishop ventures out into the frontier in 1847 to bring education to immigrants, settlers, and American Indians in the area. Wise city leaders decide to include her school when they form the St. Paul Public School System in 1856. School teachers are to be paid no more than $35 per month. That first year, there are 3 teachers and 150 students, many of them immigrants in the primary grades. Students stay in a grade until they master the material, which is why Mr. Turnblad is still with us. English language learners, class size, teacher pay, and school buildings are all issues at the first meeting of the Board of Education on June 10, 1856.
Of course, no school system is complete without a proper motto. Teach youth, men cannot be taught, is a phrase adopted from Greek philosopher Menander. The Board of Education quickly sees the need for a larger building and pays $8,433 of their own money to build a school on 8th and Olive. Washington Schoolhouse, named after America's first president, contains 4 classrooms for 240 students.
The initial school board had to be personally responsible for the schools. I think that probably worked when you were in the farm, rural area where it was your children and everybody chipped in for the education of the children. In the city, it's more complicated. You've got a lot of people who don't have children. You've got bigger issues.
2 new schools are built the very next year. While the Civil War rages in the South, the Board of Education opens a new school named the Colored Children's School.
It was near the post office, meaning it was in the downtown, which meant that anybody who was going to go to that school would have to either walk or take public transit. The children really didn't have access to public transportation. There were horse cars there, but children never would ride that. So they'd have to walk.
Due to a lack of students, the school closes permanently in 1869, after which St. Paul classrooms are open to any African American student who chooses to attend. A dedicated high school is built in 1872, and a second one known as Central is built in 1883 on 10th and Minnesota. It has 223 secondary students.
The model of urban planning, such as it was based on the notion of a village, and the school was going to be the center. So the schools were kind of monuments to the community.
The 1880s, of course, was the period of huge growth in St. Paul and Minneapolis. They were the 2 fastest growing cities in the United States and probably the 2 fastest growing cities in the world.
29 schools are built in the 1880s.
The Victorian schoolhouse was typically like the Victorian house, kind of a tall, picturesque building. The towers were lovely to look at, but towers are notoriously hard to maintain, and pigeons get in there and bad things happen, and anybody who owns a church will tell you that they're also very prone to getting hit by lightning.
The first day we felt strange and self-conscious. We had never even been inside a schoolroom before. Everything in it was completely novel. The enticing little seats and desks, the blackboards, and most of all, the little woman who was to be our teacher, and whom we loved at first sight, our adored Miss Emma Cooper. Polly Bullard, 1884.
Everybody likes the Victorians, but they were notoriously drafty, notoriously hard to heat. The plumbing and wiring and all that stuff was notoriously bad.
Styles and building materials change, and a few turn-of-the-century schools are in use nearly 100 years later.
Como is more classical revival, and that's one of the better detailed, more ornate elementary schools in the city. Most of the schools in this period would have been built either in Gothic, collegiate Gothic, or some variant of classical styles. But Randolph Heights is unusual in that it's a Spanish-styled school. It does look very Californian.
The second school building boom comes after the war to end all wars. 28 buildings are added to the inventory during the 1920s.
But if you look at most St. Paul schools that were built in the 20s, they're generally multi-story brick and usually either collegiate Gothic or maybe classical revival or maybe starting into a little bit of Art Deco later in the decades.
During this time, portable classrooms appear, while older schools are showing their age.
Then I went to the old Franklin School. I was in 7th grade. There was a big snowstorm, and the roof of the school caved in over our classroom. And we were lucky it happened at night.
The third school building boom follows the Second World War.
The 1950s schools were kind of a throwback, in many cases, to the one-story school. They have kind of long wings. They will typically have that band, that row of windows to bring a lot of light into the classroom. The thought being it was better to have elementary school kids on the ground floor, also for purposes of fire safety.
The 70s is a time of consolidation, additions, and remodeling.
Well, the second Central, which was built, I think, in about 1912, was designed by Clarence Johnston, who was one of the leading architects of St. Paul. And he did a very fine, very elaborate collegiate Gothic kind of a high school with the red brick and the tower and lots of fine detailing. And then during the throes of the desegregation days in the 70s, they decided that they had to do some things to the school to enlarge it. They stripped the entire building away down to its structural frame and then built a new school around it.
After the 1970s, there's almost no new construction. Built in 1861, the oldest St. Paul school building still in use today is dismantled in 1964, then moved and reassembled stone by stone on the grounds of Highland Park Senior High.
Primary school is the only offering from the St. Paul Public Schools for the first 10 years. Courses include spelling, reading, writing, arithmetic, and geography. Secondary education is offered as early as 1862, and courses include History of the United States, Elementary Moral Lessons, Declamation, and Composition. Primary classes are coeducational, and all of the teachers are women, with the exception of those who teach in the boys' secondary schools.
For admission to the high school, June 1896, number 1. Give all the reasons for the climate of the following regions: Arizona, Italy, and Chile.
150 years ago, everybody did not go to school. It was a privilege to go to school, and the people who did go to high school were the upper class, who were heading for professions. The so-called mechanic class learned vocational skills. The girls were not thought to be a good investment, so that many girls did not go to high school at all unless they were being prepared for some higher office, like being married to James J. Hill. So the immigrants' parents realized that the children should go to school, but the system still favored the Yankees, the English native speakers.
They spoke a mixture of Danish and Norwegian, and we kids understood that language. I remember until I was about 5 years old before I could remember any English at all.
Those who went to school got a very rigorous, but by modern standards, rote education. It was heavily biased toward men rather than women, toward Anglos rather than immigrants. It had a strong nationalistic bias to it. The students who were able to stay in the school had a tremendous advantage over those who had to go to work. If they were lucky, they would get to 8th grade, and they would take an exit exam, a state-mandated exam.
Show how climate and surface influenced people during the early years of the Republic.
And those geography exams have the same kind of questions that are on the AP exam now. But you'd have to have enough cash if you're going to go to school. You had to have shoes if you're going to go to school. And again, we have to remember that up until 1950s, most kids went all summer barefoot and got new shoes in the fall when they went to school, but didn't have shoes, you couldn't really go to school. So there were real barriers that kept the lower income children out of school.
1898 heralds a new event, the first St. Paul City Conference football game. The score, Central 25, Mechanic Arts 0. a rivalry is born.
They'd have like 2 or 3 games a year. And, McAllister would play the high schools, and the University of Minnesota would play. I mean, it was all kind of jumbled together. They'd play 3 or 4 games. It wasn't until the Depression hit that people started to actually think about staying in school because there weren't jobs. High school sports are invented to keep people active after school, and there's a whole new culture that develops around the so-called second curriculum beginning in the 30s.
Beginning in 1931, education is offered to children with special needs. The Lindsay School for Crippled Children is named after the building's founder, Mary Ellen Lindsay. In 1944, a potential barrier preventing children from attending school is removed when textbooks become free. Hot lunches follow soon afterward.
You have to remember that the Johnson High School I went to, there was no playground, there was no pool, and so every memory we had was of inside the school. I guess I remember the school lunchroom the most because everybody was laughing and eating and having a good time.
In 1954, the Supreme Court ruling in Brown versus the Board of Education states that public education that is separate cannot be equal.
It is the function of the school to take the children as it finds them, with all their diversity of race, religion, intelligence, and other background, and to provide them with a planned series of experiences which will result in their development into intelligent, good-cultured, and efficient citizens. Minnesota Department of Education Curriculum Bulletin Number 1.
By 1956, when St. Paul Public School celebrates its 100th anniversary, it serves nearly 67,000 students.
Well, when I was at Lafayette, our school, we had so many students in there that we needed to have portables. Remember, we used to like taking breaks, because when we took breaks, we had to go take the breaks inside the big building, and that's when you saw your other friends, you saw some of the girls that you were checking out.
In the 60s, adult education was added to the curriculum.
I think the first significant event there was the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which required school districts to integrate. And St. Paul, I would say, did a very successful job of doing 2 things: integrating the schools and bringing about dramatic improvement and enrichment in curriculum.
And I really believe sports was kind of like the arena where kids from all kinds of different cultures, that's where you really had that integration. You played with one another, you rode the bus together, you changed together in that locker room. So I think there's a lot of that camaraderie that really happened in that extra kind of a curricular activity.
The biggest bonus was being able to see something that was outside of your experience. Being able to talk to people who had different experience than you, so that you could learn from that. And so a lot of the social interactions in our public schools were very, very valuable for me later on in life.
By the late 60s, more than 91,000 people were making use of St. Paul schools for recreation, classes, and cultural activities. In the 70s, there's an increased focus on the arts and the promotion of health. Community education and early childhood programs are added, as well as a migrant tutorial program. American Indian programs are added to the curriculum, and a program is adopted to reduce Indian student dropout rates. St. Paul Open School opens. Mainstreaming takes the place of the Lindsay School, and by 1975, approximately 8,000 physically challenged students and 5,000 special needs children are in St. Paul Public Schools.
And I think the next biggest change in demographics was in about the 1970s, when the first Hmong, Laotian, Cambodian, and Vietnamese people came to St. Paul.
We came right from Nong Khai, which is a refugee camp in Thailand. Well, the very first elementary school I went to was Eastern Heights, actually. And when we first came here, that was the only, I think, one of the few schools where they had a newcomers program for English as a second language for Hmong refugees, so I went there.
The migration of the Somali community started at about 1992, 93, after the civil war in Somalia. When the Somali community came to St. Paul, already it seemed they were already familiar with how to work with newcomers.
Ongoing curriculum adjustments and improvements contribute to a 1991 graduation rate of 73%, among the highest in the country. As the world waits for the millennium bug to bite, 49,980 students are attending St. Paul Public Schools, 17,000 fewer than in the baby boom years.
Teachers of every era work to give their students the best possible education. That is especially true during times of crisis. World War II is a difficult time for the nation. Americans pulled together and do whatever is demanded of them. When the war ends, the servicemen return and a major shift occurs in relations between employees and employers. One of those major events occurs right here in St. Paul. On November 25, 1946, the teachers in St. Paul strike. It is the first teachers' strike in the United States.
But when the war ended and the price controls began to come off, the teachers were agitated. They wanted to get their fair income, and they were also upset with the conditions of the schools.
Just before the 10 days were up, our teachers' committee was asked to meet with some of the city fathers. This meeting was merely a delaying action, much talk and no desire of accomplishment. They suggested a citizens' committee to study the school situation, as if we hadn't presented the facts, figures, and charts all spring, summer, and fall. Signed, the Committee of 100.
Most of the teachers were women, and they were kind of another nurturing parent model, and so to all of a sudden take that labor model was a big divide to cross over, and so there was a lot of anxiety.
Teachers returned to their classrooms on December 30th, 1947. The tension between teachers and the school board, however, dates back to the very beginning.
Everybody understands the importance of schools. They're most important to parents. The Constitution is silent on education. So we, in the United States, came up with this notion of independent school boards. And it was never resolved which was the best level of government to manage education. We still haven't resolved that.
The first Board of Education consists of unpaid elected officials. Teachers and the superintendent follow guidelines covering everything from salaries to stocking the fireplace for classroom temperature control.
The male teacher in each school shall be the principal of the school. General Regulations, 1869.
In 1872, the St. Paul mayor becomes a member of the school board, and by 1891, the Board of Education is replaced by a board of school inspectors, appointed by the mayor. The first Mothers Club is formed in 1894. However, it is not a social club. School conditions, nutrition, class crowding, and teacher salaries are the main issues. In 1914, the mayor's office takes over the Board of Education. The new city council commissioners are elected officials. 24 Mothers Clubs joined forces to become the Parent-Teacher Association in 1924. Teachers and parents together act as advocates for the students. After years of failed votes, the teachers and parents prevail when the school system becomes independent once again on July 1st, 1965. The goal of continued excellence endures.
But I think my favorite teacher was Mrs. Murphy, and she urged me to memorize poetry. I think I even remember Wendadi Prelli with the Shuri Shuti. The Druti of March hath pierced to the Gruti, and bathed every vein in switch liquor, of which virtue engendered is the floor. Chaucer. That's 56 years ago.
I know when I finally started working at WCCO, which was while I was still in high school, our speech teacher there, Ms. Vest, was so anxious to help me any way she could. I was just a CBS page boy at that time, but she knew what my dreams were, and any way she could support me, she would.
They had she was Mrs. Davini and then became Mrs. Tanucci, and was very adamant about teaching us that we would talk, and it was Italian, not Italians, because it's not idly. And she was very, very distinct on that one, obviously. Very Italian herself.
And then Ron Costin came over, And Ron, to this day, is probably one of the most influential people in my life. The way that I remember him, he showed us and taught us what dedication meant, because almost every Monday he kicked me out of practice because I'd come and goof off. We don't need your screwing off every week. He says, we need a better example and somebody to dedicate themselves more and understand what this is all about. So you're not even going to play on Friday. There's nothing a coach could have done to me that could have done a better job, because from that day on I never goofed off in practices, and ultimately I became a better player.
My junior high school teacher and my senior high school teacher, gym teachers, were my idols. And so I went to the university to become a Phi Ed major.
Hey man, make that piano talk. The 60s is a time of hippies, love bugs, and war protests. Most of the baby boomers are school-aged and packed into classrooms. During that time, 2 St. Paul graduates from 1925 rise to serve on the highest court in the land. Harry Blackman, a Mechanic Arts alumni, and Warren Berger, a Johnson graduate, do not see eye to eye as Supreme Court justices. Harry Blackman, Mechanic Arts valedictorian, writes the famous Roe versus Wade decision. He made an impact, but he's not the only well-known and accomplished St. Paul Public School graduate.
That you must respect your elders. Recognize the fact that they have gone through many, many more things than you have.
I drew from my public education all the time. It's helped me in my entire career. I didn't realize at the time how important it was to go to a good public school.
History and communication will help you no matter what road you choose down the line.
My wish for kids today would be that I would hope that they'd have a dream. I think if people are ready to work hard and not afraid of responsibilities, you can do whatever you want to be.
Get used to learning. You're going to have to learn new skills, new subjects, your entire life.
It's an investment. The more you invest, the more you get out of the school experience. And I truly believe that the opportunity in the St. Paul schools is as it was then, where you have every opportunity to choose your destiny.
I think just growing up in St. Paul has made me understand is where you grow up is what you become. And education should be the priority instead of the other way around.
You get out of the school system what you put into it, and if you want to put a lot into it, the St. Paul school system is there to deliver.
10 of my 11 siblings have all gone through the St. Paul public school system. And you know, and on behalf of my mom and dad, I say wacha, which is thank you to all the teachers who've added to the spirit of what the St. Paul Public Schools is about.
The challenges of 2006 are similar to those of 1856. Funding, class size, and meeting the special needs of immigrants continues to demand our attention. Yet our accomplishments are many. Student test scores have improved considerably. Our ELL instruction is nationally recognized, and many of our graduates attend the nation's finest universities and colleges. 150 years after Harriet Bishop's one-room school becomes part of St. Paul Public Schools, her goals are being met. Education for the diverse and wonderful children of St. Paul.